Somewhere in the early 18th century, a single manuscript folio went missing from Lambeth Palace. Nobody knows who took it, or why. What we know is this. Before it vanished, a British scholar named George Hicks had the good sense to copy down what was written on it. Roughly 50 lines of Old English verse describing a night attack, desperate defence, and warriors who held a doorway for 5 days without losing a single man. The fight at Finnsburgh, blood, oaths, and a tragedy of divided loyalties. The lost poem and the violence it remembers. Now, that folio contained the Finnsburgh Fragment, and its disappearance is one of the great frustrations of Anglo-Saxon scholarship. The story it tells, or rather the story it hints at, is older than England itself. It concerns a blood feud between Danes and Frisians sometime around 450 AD. A political marriage that failed to keep the peace, a man named Hengest, who may or may not have gone on to found the Kingdom of Kent in England. The tale was famous once. The Beowulf poet calls it a tale often recited. Anglo-Saxon audiences knew it cold, and we're left piecing together fragments. The Finnsburgh material survives in two forms, and they couldn't be more different in tone. The Finnsburgh Fragment is pure combat. It opens with no preamble, no context, just a young Danish prince named Hanif. I probably pronounced that wrong. Moving on. Spotting a torchlight in the darkness outside the mead hall. This is not dawn from the east, he says. No dragonflies here. The gables of the hall are not burning, but men are making an attack. What follows is a siege. 60 Danish warriors hold 2 doorways against Frisian assault. The poet doesn't waste words on motivation or backstory. He gives us a clash of shields, the boom of the hall floor under stomping feet, swords gleaming so bright it seemed as if all Finnsburgh were in flames. A Frisian warrior named Beowulf ignores his companion's warnings and leads the first charge. He dies for it, first of all the warriors living in that land to fall. The Danes hold for 5 days. Not one of them dies. The fragment ends mid-scene, with a wounded defender reporting his armour is broken, his helmet is pierced, and we never learn what happened next. The Finnsburgh episode in Beowulf, between lines 1063 and 1158, picks up the story after the battle and shifts the focus entirely. Here, the combat is over. Hnaf is dead, so is Hildebrand's son, who was fighting alongside his uncle against his father's people. The Frisians have been gutted, and the Beowulf poet isn't interested in heroics, he's interested in grief. Hildebrand, a Danish princess married to the Frisian king Finn as a peace weaver. I have a complete video on Hildebrand in my Peoples of Beowulf playlist, I'll link that down below. She stands at the centre of the episode. She's lost her brother and her son on opposite sides of the same fight. The poet calls her Yeumaru Ethis, a sad woman, which comes off like a bit of an understatement. She orders her son's body placed on Hnaf's funeral pyre. The greatest of funeral fires wound to the clouds, roared before the mound, heads melted, wound openings burst, blood sprang out from the body's feud bites. That's not heroic poetry. That's horror. To understand Finnsburgh, you need to understand what a peace weaver was supposed to do, and why it so often failed. Germanic societies used marriage as diplomacy. A woman sent from one tribe to another carried a hope of allegiance in her person. She was meant to bind families together to give both sides a stake in peace. The Old English term is Threathuwebe, literally a weaver of peace. Hildebrand was one of these women, daughter of Hok, sister of Hnaf. She was married to Finn, king of the Frisians, to end a feud between their peoples. For a time, it seemed to have worked. She bore Finn a son, her brother visited as an honoured guest. Then something went wrong. The texts we have don't tell us what sparked the violence. Tolkien, who spent years studying this material, believed that Jutish warriors serving in both retinues, men with their own grudges, ignited the conflict. Others have suggested pre-existing blood debts that the marriage couldn't erase. What's clear is that hospitality was violated. Hnaf, a guest in his brother-in-law's hall, was attacked by Finn's men. The peace weaving failed, and Hildebrand paid the price, not only with her own life, but with her brother and her son. Beowulf alludes to a possible reason for the conflict when telling his uncle Hygelac about the other Freawerbe in the poem, that of Freawaru, Hrothgar's daughter, and Ingild of the Hathobards. I'll link to that video in the description below. The moral of all this? Never marry your daughter off to a tribe that has a blood feud against you, because shit will get sticky very, very quickly. After the battle, neither side can claim victory. Finn has lost most of his warriors, the Danes stranded on foreign soil can't fight their way home. A treaty is negotiated, one that heavily favours the Danes. They get half of Finn's haul, they get treasure and feasts. Any Frisians who taunt them for serving the Lord's killer will be settled with the edge of the sword. Finn swears these oaths with unfeigned zeal. Tolkien read this as genuine remorse. Finn hadn't wanted the attack, his men had acted without consent, or against his wishes. Now he's trapped, guilty, ashamed, and bound by honour to house the men who have every reason to kill him. One of these men is Hengest. Hengest had been Hnaf's chief retainer. Now he's the leader of the surviving Danes. Most of his companions leave for home when the seas open in spring. Hengest stays. The poet tells us he broods through the winter, thinking not of the sea road home, but of vengeance. When spring comes, a figure called the Son of Hanlaf places a famous sword across Hengest's lap. The gesture is unmistakable, a reminder of his duty to avenge his fallen lord. Shortly after, two of Hnaf's former warriors, Gunnlav and Oslav, return to Denmark to tell their people what happened. The consequence is slaughter. Hengest and the returning Danes kill Finn in his own hall. They kill every Frisian they can find. The poet describes the aftermath with grim understatement. The hall was decorated with the lives of the foes. They loot Finnsburg. They take Hilda back to Denmark, to her people. Now here's where the story gets strange, and possibly a little historical. According to Bede and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a man named Hengest led the first Germanic settlements of Britain in the mid-5th century. He and his brother Horsa arrived as mercenaries invited by British King Vortigern to fight the Picts. They stayed. They conquered. Hengest founded the Kingdom of Kent. Tolkien believed this was the same Hengest. The timeline fits, the name is rare, and if Hengest broke his oath to Finn, he would have violated the peace treaty to take his vengeance. He would have been an outlaw, a man without honour in his homeland. Britain would have been a convenient place to disappear. This is, of course, unprovable. But the possibility gives the Finnsburgh story a weight it might otherwise lack. This isn't just a tale of ancient feuds, it might be the origin story for England itself. So, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Hengest and Horsa are mentioned in 449 and again in 455. The Battle of Finnsburg supposedly took place in about 450-ish. The 449 entry states that after beating the Picts for King Vortigern, they sent to Angle and ordered them to send more men. The entry on 455 states that Hengest and Horsa fought against King Vortigern. I'll leave this for your imagination, but know this, soon I'll be doing a video on Hengest. And yes, I know, before you get your knickers in a twist, I've been saying Hengest and Hengest. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Hengest because the G comes before the E and therefore it's pronounced Y, not J. But, you know, the difference between the fragment and the episodes is striking. In the fragment, Hildebrand doesn't even exist. The focus is entirely on combat, the clash of weapons, the courage of the defenders, the praise of the warriors who never better repaid the glowing mead. It's heroic poetry in the purest sense, men doing what men are supposed to do, dying well if they must. In the episode, the heroics are over. What remains is the aftermath, grief, compromise, betrayal, more grief. Hildebrand dominates the narrative. Hengest broods, the poet seems less interested in celebrating courage than in mourning its cost. Some scholars believe this represents different poetic traditions, one focused on battle, one on tragedy. Others suggest that the Beowulf poet deliberately chose to emphasize the human cost, placing the episode just before Queen Rotheo appears in the narrative. The implication is clear. Peace-weaving fails. Women suffer. The cycle continues, maybe even foreshadowing her daughter Freawaru. One detail sets the Finnsburgh material apart from almost everything else in Old English literature. It's pagan. The fragment contains no Christian references whatsoever. The cremation of Hnaf in the episode is explicitly pre-Christian. Bodies burned on pyres, not buried in consecrated grounds. Tolkien argued that this was evidence that the story was historical rather than legendary, preserved from a time before the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons. Whether or not that's true, the absence of Christianity gives the Finnsburgh material a different texture. There's no divine providence here. No sense of suffering serves a higher purpose. Just blood, oaths, and the grim logic of vengeance. And that time has come again where I'm supposed to sit here and ask you people to like, comment, and subscribe on these videos. I would appreciate it. So why does all this still matter? The Finnsburgh story is incomplete. The original manuscript was lost. The episode in Beowulf assumes an audience that already knows the tale. It alludes rather than explains. Scholars have been arguing about this basic plot point for over a century, and yet the story still endures. Tolkien spent years on it, eventually producing a book-length study published after his death. He borrowed names from the tale, Gurolf and Guflaf, for his Rohirrim in The Lord of the Rings. The theme of the story, loyalty versus vengeance, the failure of political marriage, the tragedy of divided loyalties, resonated with him deeply. And they resonate still. The Finnsburgh material is a window into a world where honour was everything and peace was fragile. Where a woman could be sent across tribal lines to weave peace, only to watch her brother and her son kill each other. Where a man could swear an oath and break it, and spend the rest of his life running from the consequences. The fragment ends mid-sentence. The episode ends with Hildebra going home to a family that no longer exists. Some stories don't need endings. The silence says enough.